Wir dachten damals, die ÖFJ machte ja immer große Pfingsttreffen in den 70er Jahren. Dachten wir müssen auch ein schwules Pfingsttreffen haben.
Obwohl wir wieder bestes Tuntenwetter hatten, war das Wasser doch recht kalt. Doch den kräftigsten Männern macht das natürlich nichts aus.
Wir hatten ja schon gleich von Anfang an 3 Schwerpunkte gesetzt. Der erste war, wir sind Familie. Der Kreis, der dort ist, übernimmt alle Funktionen vom Verreisen, vom Weihnachten feiern und so weiter. Der zweite Punkt, wir machen Aufklärungsarbeit in der schwulen Subkultur, so hieß das ja damals, oder schwul-lesbischen Subkultur. Und der dritte Punkt war, wir machen Öffentlichkeit in der DDR-Gesellschaft.
Auf allen Wegen, wir, Sozialismus wollen wir leben, wir, unser Stern wird ewig strahlen und wir mit ihm, vorwärts gehen wir, bauen auf.
Kennen tun wir uns seit 63, 64.
7. Februar.
63 und 64 hat sie geschnackelt.
48 Jahre.
47. Er will nur schneller Goldbräute haben wir, ein Irrtum. Unser Ziel war, ganz normal zu leben. Von vielen wurde vielleicht auch von den Schwulen, von den Jüngeren vielleicht auch als Duckmäuser oder als, naja, ihr macht nichts dagegen. Wir wollten ganz normal leben. Wir haben uns auch angeglichen, mehr oder weniger. Man wollte nicht auffallen.
Jochen Hick, Andreas Strohfeldt, very warm welcome to the Berlinale and to the Teddy Awards, of course. You brought a political documentary in a way to the festival, which deals with the biographies and political identities of gay and lesbian people in the former east of Germany. So what was, maybe to start out with, the inspiration for this film? Why did you decide to put this documentary out and show it at the festival?
Well, I was once working for the gay television company here, and we had worked together on a film before, which was in Russia, which I did, and for this gay television he suggested to do a 45 minutes film about the Russian gay scene, and I thought, why not do one first about the East German gay scene, because maybe that's for our spectators, and because it's in German and everything, the best thing. So he started to do research, and we had a 45 minutes TV documentary first about the topic, and then did a totally different one, a feature-length thing later on, which is now out.
Okay. And until recently, there was perfectly in the public was almost nothing known about the gay and lesbian scene in the GDR. There were some books, but with very little covering. And so we decided to recover what was happening during the GDR with homosexuality, with lesbian and gays, and it was a really interesting research and then a really interesting conversation with the people who are in the film and with the other people who are not in the film.
So maybe let's go back and unravel it a little bit. So if we talk about the former East and the gay community, how did it exist and how did it differ also from the West German community maybe?
I mean, of course, since there were two main differences. One difference is that you could really have bars, like commercial bars in the West, and also in the West maybe there was one thing which was also different, that the paragraph 175 was in charge much longer than in the East. However, in the East, the problem was that whenever you wanted to gather, you could only gather or come together in groups when you were allowed by the state or when you got permission. And the gays never got any permission, at least until the early 80s, when generally the GDR allowed opposition groups and together under the roof of the church, under the umbrella of the church. And this is when the gay movement in the GDR started. What we also found out is that already back in the 70s, and we didn't find that out, that was but it hasn't been in film yet, that already in the 70s there was a group of really communist and very eagerly proud GDR guys who formed their own group in the early 70s and always tried to constitute a group. But it took them 7 or 8 years and they never got the permission for it. And what we have in the film, which is quite an interesting thing, is like maybe also the very, very first gay demonstration, which happened during the World Youth Festival, where about 30,000 people from all over the world in 1973 came to Berlin. And there was also Peter Tatchell, who is an activist from London, and he put up a placard about homosexual rights for gays in the GDR, and he was beaten up, but more by his own people than even by the GDR.
So that was a demonstration.
Yeah,
he traveled to the GDR.
He traveled to the GDR as part of the British delegation, because communist delegations from all over the world came to this youth festival in '73. Okay. This was held in East Berlin.
Mm-hmm. So from
And
what
there was another difference, because in the GDR, the influence of the Catholic Church and other radicalists from the church and mentality was not so big than, for instance, in the Federal Republic of Germany, because the communists were against the church, and that's why I think it is one of the most interesting moments that the gay movement organized under the roof of the church himself in the beginning of the 80s, that the church, the Protestant church, opened to gays and lesbians, though the tradition, the Christian tradition or the church or religious tradition was not in pro of gays as we know for centuries.
So from what I understand, that especially in the GDR too, it was not only a question of sexuality, but it was always connected to either politics or religion.
Yeah, it was always connected to they always wanted to control everything. And of course, the GDR had a family policy, which was very much into like that you married with age 19 and you got even money from the state, which you had loans with very low interest in order to fund a family and get children, because they needed children, they needed workers and everything. So for them, for a big part, like also in Western Germany, the model of what gays and lesbians would bring into society was not really a favored thing.
So sexuality was really very much regulated by the state?
No, not really regulated by the state. It was more like they had their norm. They had their norm, but of course there was sexuality in the state, and we know that some people say that this was one of the biggest funds in the GDR was to have sex, because it was free and you could do it in your own rooms, and there was no control over it. So I wouldn't say that there was really a big control over sex, but they didn't promote homosexuality because they thought this is really a decadent thing, and this is nothing we would really like to support in society. Although there were always different currents, you know, some people were a little bit more advanced, but however, also the GDR was a little bit petit bourgeois, like Western Germany was as well, because I mean they're the same people and it's the same tradition. I mean you don't change within 10 years after the war.
Relating to sexuality, even most people, most of the interviews we have dealt with, even thought that it was much more easy in the GDR. It means in these former times to get sex, to have sex, and to have some more meetings in the homosexual underground in the community.
So where would that happen?
Even easier than today. But the point was that you had the policy from one kind, and the other side, society was developing for themselves, so that this kind of question in society was not raised.
So when you were talking about that the kind of access to sexuality was maybe even easier than today, where were these gatherings happening? Did they have like sex parties, or were there
the people who
bars or toilets, or like how?
The problem was, of course, the coming out period from when you began to understand that you are gay, and that in the GDR it was not that it was not a topic. There was no information. That is another difference from the West. Only if you had contact to the West, and then when you had your coming out, there were centers. That means you had the so-called Klappen, where people met at public toilets. Then you had in Berlin and in some other cities some gay bars, some meeting places, and of course also we are dealing in the film with parties. With people organized, and they had a lot of friends and a lot of people around them, and so they organized the party, but they were closed.
A lot had happened privately, and so I think maybe it was easy to have sex, but it was not easy really to meet other people so easily, because until the early 80s, and even some people didn't like to go to church groups, I mean, there were no meeting places. I mean, there were only, Berlin had maybe 3 or 4 bars. I mean, the lesbians still say that they didn't have one really dedicated bar for lesbians, even in Berlin. And I mean, so where did they meet? Because you couldn't meet or say we are grouping here, because this was just not allowed. If you wouldn't do it under the party's umbrella or the Kulturbund, it wasn't allowed. And the party, until the mid-80s, left it to the churches, because they thought, okay, opposition group, and we control everything through Stasi, which is a big point also in our film. And then they realized, oh, I mean, the gays didn't ever really bother us that much. I mean, why don't we allow them to do it even within our state organizations? And then they opened youth clubs, and many more things were allowed. But it was already too late to get all these people back who were already in opposition because of it.
And it was even for some time it was even difficult to have some contact advertisement or something like that in newspapers, so that you say man is looking for a man. It was for some time it was forbidden, for other times it was allowed. But people had somehow to hide what they are wanting. So that you had to opera fan is looking for opera fan, and everybody understood that
like
I am looking
code.
for a friend.
Yeah.
Then even the state policy was that when the people in Berlin in the 70s wanted to organize their consultation and meeting center for homosexuals, they even were sent to the Council of Ministers, and they said, okay, it is not forbidden what you are doing, you have all rights in the GDR, but what you are doing and what you want to do is against the moral and the ethics of our country.
You cannot do a group, but you can have gay sex. We don't, it's not forbidden to have gay sex,
Okay.
but
If
that's
you're
all
older than
we
18.
will allow you. You may have gay sex and we won't punish it. That was the rule.
So getting back to the film, what do you think, what kind of information does the film reveal to a contemporary audience, especially, Berlin 2013?
I think to a contemporary audience, I think the whole GDR thing is really not over, the whole GDR discussion. I think it's starting to become even more interesting nowadays, and even 20 or 22 years after the wall came down. And what we were really looking is like to see these people today also, how they reflect on what is happening, what they could, what of their political fight and what of their ideas has remained. Some of these people in the last years or last few years have looked for the first time to their Stasi files, and all these things are revealed. For example, also the thing about this first demonstration, the photographs which came out, the first demonstration in the East Bloc in 1973. these photographs were taken out of archives or found in archives last year. So there are a lot of things which really go from this past and are very, very actual. I mean, they're very current, and this is what we wanted to do. We didn't want to make a film which is a closed historical period from here to there, but to see how people reflect what's really different also today, and you know, to have these long connections into the present. Yeah.
And then we wanted also to show, and that is part why we decided for these people who are now in the film, how people deal with a situation where their behavior is not allowed. That means the strategies and the tactics of people when they are growing up and when they are acting in a surrounding which is hostile to them. And I think that is very interesting how people reacted and what they were doing and the courage they had in order to stand against the main
mainstream.
The mainstream, thank you very much for the mainstream. And I think this is very important because the mainstream is very, very dangerous for everybody.
Yeah, that's and if we look from today's perspective and see, you know, like queer sexuality, gay sexuality. I don't know if gay is still a very contemporary term, but I prefer queer sexuality. Which becomes
back
more.
Then they didn't have that expression. That's why I would say. And even back then, some of them didn't even say schwul. They would say, the older ones. We have people who were born in the 30s, and they said we were verzaubert, we were enchanted. This was their word. I mean, and they kept it, and they're still keeping it today. They still don't say schwul.
Yes. And they even say they feel bad when they hear the word schwul.
Okay. So, but how do you think, if we talk about this global discussion, which is probably going on right now, you know, of sexuality, how does your film contribute to this kind of mindset of global queer sexuality?
I think it. First, you can learn a lot about the working together and drifting away or part of the gay and lesbian movement. You know, where really the problems are, why gays very often don't really work properly together with the lesbians or other groups. You know, why everyone wants to do his thing. The other thing is, like, I think the film is very interesting for any. To compare with any country which has state dictators or which is more people in the world live in countries where you have dictators than where you have democracies in numbers. And I think you can learn a lot about the way what they did, how they did it, why they did it, how secret services were interested, how people found their ways to go around the secret service and still work together with it. And all these things are still very, very current, because you will have it in all countries where you will have it in Russia in a very different way, you have it in China, you have it in North Korea, you have it in Laos, in Vietnam, you have it in all these countries, including the African countries. So I think it contributes to an awareness about how a sexual minority expresses itself, and also tries to always push the limits or find personal ways around state structures which oppress.
And there's another point, I think, that people today who are growing up today, they are so centered on contemporary life that it is maybe for the people it would be an interesting look back. What was the situation, or how was the situation about 30 or 40 or 50 years ago? That means what problems, which problems the people dealt, gays and lesbians and queer people dealt at this time, and what did the people do in order to come out, and to come out publicly? And I think this is also an historical perspective which may contribute a little bit to widen up.
And another thing is that I really think it's a very valid film about the GDR, because there are a lot of films which are very stereotypic about the GDR, which we see in television, like a lot of 45 minutes who always repeat the same look on stars, and everything. And of course we have all these topics in, but it's much more, even also because it's a 90-minute. And the interesting thing in our film is, I think, that we combine really sexuality with politics also on a high level, and that it's not always this kind of enclosed look on a little gay scene which does everything within itself, but has never any connection or friction with politics or with government or all these things. So you really have the different levels. You also have people, gay people who were in the party, who were really in upper circles in the party, and all this, what this really means. And I think it's time now to really see that gays always have been in all centers, in all areas of society, and not always in their little subculture and retelling the story of their little subculture again and again and again. You know, so this is what really opens a little bit the picture. So it's also a valid film about the GDR. You wouldn't even have to tell it's about gays and lesbians as well, but it's a film about gays and lesbians as well in the GDR, and that's the nice thing about it. But it's a valid film where you learn a lot about the GDR, I think also what you haven't seen in films before.
Yeah, and then it is, if you sum it up, it is somehow also a film about the death of a dream. Yeah, what people dreamed about in the 50s or in the 60s when they wanted to build up a new Germany, another Germany, and what came out at the end.
Because
Can you elaborate on that? Just elaborate.
I mean, in the 50s, 60s, of course, and even in the 70s or 80s. I mean, we have people in the film who still believed in that the GDR is the better idea, for sure. But just they realized more and more that some things didn't really work like that, and all this and this and that. But this also had to do with not thinking about things they didn't want to know really, but in general, of course, when you see some of the films, and we have a lot of documentary material in this, there's really a lot in it, and also a lot of documentary material which hasn't been seen yet, which we found in the archives, you really see that there was, it really was a movement, and a lot of people really, really believed that they were doing something good. At least in the beginning, I can't really look into people's heads, but at least what they are saying, they really believe that they are living in a society which is much, much better than the West, which is much more equal for people and all this, And that's the interesting thing, to also see gay, so-called gay communists, and so those gay communists also had then big troubles because they didn't want to go into church groups, because they said, we are in the GDR, we are in the party, we want to have everything in the party, we want to change the party, but they didn't succeed.
The party and the state,
Yeah,
and it was idealistic, and it was somehow like a dream in the beginning, and then the obstacles to this dream, they grew and grew and grew and grew and grew until the end.
Right? Yeah.
Thank you. Do you want to add something?
No.
Thank you very much for coming, and I wish you all the best for the screenings and a great reception from the audience here at the festival.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Enjoy your time here.
Thank you.
Yes.
Tun wir uns seit 63, 64.
7. Februar.
63 und 64 hat sie schnackelt.
48 Jahre.
47. Er will nur schneller Goldbräute haben wir, ein Irrtum. Unser Ziel war, ganz normal zu leben. Von vielen wurde vielleicht auch von den Schwulen, von den Jüngeren vielleicht auch als Duckmäuser oder als, naja, ihr macht nichts dagegen. Wir wollten ganz normal leben. Wir haben uns auch angeglichen, mehr oder weniger. Man wollte nicht auffallen.
Jochen Hick, Andreas Strohfeldt, very
Russian gay scene, and I thought, why not do one first about the East German gay scene, because maybe that's for our spectators and because it's in German and everything the best thing. So he started to do research, and we had a 45 minutes TV documentary first about the topic, and then did a totally different one, a feature-length thing later on, which is now out.
Okay. And until recently, there was perfectly in the public was almost nothing known about the gay and lesbian scene in the GDR. There were some books.
A very warm welcome to the Berlinale and to the Teddy Awards, of course. You brought a political documentary, in a way, to the festival, which deals with the biographies and political identities of gay and lesbian people in the former east of Germany. So what was, maybe to start out with, the inspiration for this film? Why did you decide to put this documentary out and show it at the festival?
Well, I was once working for the gay television company here, and we had worked together on a film before, which was in Russia, which I did, and for this gay television he suggested to do a 45 minutes film about the
Wir dachten damals, die ÖFJ machte ja immer große Pfingsttreffen in den 70er Jahren. Dachten wir müssen auch ein schwules Pfingsttreffen haben.
Obwohl wir wieder bestes Tuntenwetter hatten, war das Wasser doch recht kalt. Doch den kräftigsten Männern macht das natürlich nichts aus.
Wir hatten ja schon gleich von Anfang an 3 Schwerpunkte gesetzt. Der erste war, wir sind Familie. Der Kreis, der dort ist, übernimmt alle Funktionen vom Verreisen, vom Weihnachten feiern und so weiter. Der zweite Punkt, wir machen Aufklärungsarbeit in der schwulen Subkultur, so hieß das ja damals, oder schwul-lesbischen Subkultur. Und der dritte Punkt war, wir machen Öffentlichkeit in der DDR-Gesellschaft.
Auf allen Wegen, wir, Sozialismus wollen wir leben, wir, unser Stern wird